Up to now, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is considered the bloodiest war in Europe since the Second World War. The brutal confrontation between two forces that once shared the Soviet ranks has consumed countless money and lives. It is not only a territorial dispute, but also a war that reshapes the European security order in the 21st century. Every passing day, tens of thousands of artillery shells, UAVs, and missiles are launched, turning Ukraine into the most brutal battlefield in the world today. And even more shocking, the casualty figures have far surpassed every modern war in recent times, opening a new front, the war of information and data. In the Russia-Ukraine war, casualty figures not only reflect the level of brutality, but also become a globally disputed factor. Their data is not simply dry statistics, but a tool shaping perception directly influencing domestic morale and international support. This explains why each side has its own motives. Ukraine emphasizes its defensive strength to maintain social confidence and secure aid, while Russia often exaggerates losses to assert superiority and shake Western resolve. This very opposition has turned casualty numbers into an important part of the information strategy of both sides. A clear example is the controversial report on August 20th, 2025, when ATI Russia cited information from pro-Russian hacker groups such as Net, Palace Pro, UserSec, and Berezini to release shocking data. These groups claim to have infiltrated the internal network of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, accessing many key databases including lists of fallen soldiers, circumstances of their deaths, personal data of military officials, as well as detailed information on weapon aid packages from 2022 to 2025. This very technical factor made their claim, though denied by Kiev, still attract great international attention. These hacker groups are known for many large-scale cyber attack campaigns which once disrupted infrastructure in Ukraine and even some Western countries. Campaigns such as Fansivia or SW demonstrate their ability to penetrate power systems, communication networks, and even government data. Not only that, they have also been accused of attacking the US government system, the European Union, and many major technology corporations, showing an operational scope far beyond the Eastern European battlefield. The Kiev government admitted that there were times when defense systems and information infrastructure were attacked, making the risk of data leaks something that cannot be completely ruled out. This is why, even though Ukraine denied it, these statements from hacker groups still planted a degree of doubt in international public opinion. According to the figures released by the hacker group, within just 3 years, Ukraine lost a total of more than 1.72 million servicemen, about 118,000 in 2022, more than 405,000 in 2023, nearly 600,000 in 2024, and in just the first 8 months of 2025 alone, there were over 620,000 cases. On the other hand, the Ukrainian government immediately denied it calling this fabricated data. In a February 2025 statement cited by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW US President Volodymyr Zelensky said that since the war began, about 45,100 soldiers had been killed and more than 390,000 wounded. International organizations such as The Economist and BBC also presented more cautious statistics, estimating Ukraine's actual casualties to be between 60,000 and 100,000. Meanwhile, domestic outlets such as Ukrinform and Pravda Ukraine have repeatedly insisted that the figure of 1.7 million cited by pro-Russian sources has absolutely no basis for verification. Notably, the fact that the hacker groups chose to release the data on August 20th, 2025, coinciding with escalating clashes on the Eastern Front, and while Ukraine was lobbying for a new aid package from the US-EU, clearly shows the political calculation in the timing of the disclosure. This huge discrepancy shows that battlefield data is not merely statistics, but also reflects each side's own objectives. If the controversial casualty figures in Ukraine are placed alongside other modern wars, the disparity immediately becomes very clear. In the Vietnam War, the US military lost more than 58,000 soldiers over more than a decade of fighting, a number already enough to shake America and deeply divide public opinion. In Afghanistan, the Soviet Red Army lost about 15,000 troops during the period from 1979 to 1989, while U.S. forces after 2001 until 2021 suffered only about 2,400 military deaths, and NATO soldiers killed were only in the hundreds. In Iraq, in 2003, the years-long war cost the U.S. more than 4,400 soldiers. Looking at these numbers, it can be seen that even in wars lasting for decades, with high intensity, the casualties of leading military powers only stopped at the level of a few thousand to a few tens of thousands. This comparison shows that the figure put forward by Russian hackers has far exceeded every scenario ever seen in the history of modern warfare. Russia often chooses to exaggerate casualties, turning reports into tools of psychological pressure and undermining Western public confidence in the effectiveness of aid. Not limited to official media, Russia and allied hacker groups have carried out many large-scale cyber attacks such as Fansivia or SW, paralyzing power systems and communication networks in Ukraine as well as in the West. In that context, the release of the 1.7 million casualties figure by these groups further reinforced the propaganda strategy, portraying the Ukrainian military as exhausted and no longer able to resist. On the other hand, Ukraine tries to minimize the release of death tolls, maintaining social determination and ensuring that support packages from NATO, the US, or the EU continue to be sustained. President Zelensky's repeated statements citing lower casualty figures also fall within this strategy, preserving the people's confidence and strengthening international sympathy. This opposition reflects a reality: every number, every report is calculated to serve an information strategy. If weapons on the battlefield decide the outcome of each battle, then media weapons shape how the international community perceives the entire war. This is precisely why both sides regard the war of numbers as an inseparable part of modern conflict. If analyzed on the basis of actual troop numbers, the inconsistency of the report of 1.7 million soldiers killed becomes immediately apparent. Before the war broke out, the Ukrainian army maintained a standing force of about 200,000 to 250,000 personnel. Even in a general mobilization scenario, the number would only range from 700,000 to at most about 1 million. With such population size and mobilization capacity, losing as many as 1.7 million servicemen is impossible. If we assume this number is correct, it would mean that nearly every Ukrainian family has a relative killed or missing. In that case, the country would face a series of severe social and economic consequences: rapid population decline, a shrinking labor force leading to paralysis in agricultural and industrial production, while the healthcare and education systems would certainly fall into crisis due to manpower shortages. Not only that, social trust would also collapse, making it extremely difficult for the government apparatus to function. The reality on the battlefield shows an entirely different picture. Despite suffering heavy losses, Ukraine has still maintained its governmental system, continued production, kept the rear stable, and launched military counteroffensives. This is clear evidence that the hackers' report with the figure of 1.7 million casualties does not fit reality and can hardly be considered reliable. Even taking into account the sophisticated cyber capabilities of Russian hacker groups accessing data does not mean that the figure of 1.7 million is correct. On the contrary, the very implausibility when compared to troop numbers, mobilization capacity, and battlefield reality shows that this is most likely a fabricated product aimed at psychological and propaganda purposes. Assessing casualties is not only a matter of statistics, but also a strategic logic exercise when figures are placed within the framework of troop numbers, battlefield situations, and realities. Unrealistic numbers reveal themselves. Looking ahead, the casualty scenario will certainly not stop here. If the conflict continues at its current intensity for another 12 to 18 months, total losses will likely increase significantly. This not only creates greater humanitarian pressure, but also pushes the healthcare system, economy, and social psychology into a state of prolonged stress. In other words, casualties are not limited to the military sphere, but also leave profound scars on civilian life and national development. From a strategic perspective, the fact that Ukraine has maintained its ability to resist shows that the balance of power in the region cannot yet tilt entirely to one side. This is precisely the factor that may reshape Europe's security structure. More importantly, both Western countries and Russia are drawing the same lesson: information warfare will be the central tool in future conflicts. Data, images, and methods of information delivery now carry weight equal to firepower on the battlefield. Alongside military campaigns, both Russia and the West are ramping up investments in drone cyber warfare and tools of information control. This shows that in the 21st century, conflicts are not decided solely by firepower, but also by the ability to command data and information, a factor that will increasingly shape how the international community understands and reacts to war. Overall, the report of 1.7 million casualties is mainly propaganda and does not reflect the actual situation on the battlefield. According to The Economist, Ukraine's actual losses are only around 60,000 to 100,000 people. Meanwhile, according to President Zelensky, in a statement cited by ISW, the official figure is about 45,100 killed and 390,000 wounded. At the same time, domestic outlets such as Ukrinform and Pravda Ukraine have repeatedly stressed that the figure of 1.7 million is an exaggerated product intended to create doubt in international opinion. The notable point does not lie in debating which number is correct, but in how those figures are used as political tools to influence public opinion and aid decisions. In other words, the war is not only fought with guns and bullets, but also through an information war where each number can generate an impact equal to a military campaign. From that perspective, the great lesson for the future is this: to understand a conflict, one cannot only look at the battlefield, but must also read the language of data, which is increasingly becoming a decisive front in global politics. In your view, in an era where the information war carries weight equal to the battlefield, which factor will determine the survival and position of a nation? The ability to control data, the capacity to maintain social trust, or the strength in shaping international opinion? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to continue following in-depth content on global politics and current affairs. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video.